I was 40 stories up, balancing on a 6-inch wide flange beam when the radio crackled. Grayson Wilson didn't just fire me, he endangered my life and insulted my entire career because he thought a woman couldn't handle the steel. He laughed as he ordered me down, but he forgot one critical detail. Without my specific certification stamp on that iron, his $80 million skyscraper was legally just a pile of scrap metal. The wind at 400 feet doesn't just blow, it hunts. It searches for a loose flap on your jacket, a gap in your footing, or a moment of hesitation. I didn't give it any of those things. I was a statue made of muscle and grit, my boots locked onto the red iron of the 38th floor. I was lining up a massive perimeter column, the steel groaning as the crane eased it into position. My spud wrench was already in my hand, a heavy, familiar weight that felt like an extension of my own arm. I was 48 years old, and I had spent more of my life in the clouds than I had on the pavement. Easy on the swing. I barked into my headset, watching the 2-ton beam drift inches from my face. Bring it down a hair, not a foot. The operator, a good kid named Mikey, feathered the controls. The steel kissed the connection point with a dull, satisfying thud. I jammed the tail of my wrench into the bolt hole to align it, my movements automatic, precise. This was the dance. This was what I did better than anyone else in the tri-state area. Then the channel on my radio clicked over. It wasn't Mikey. It was the sharp, nasal voice of Grayson Wilson, the project manager who had been on site for exactly 3 weeks. "Jones," Grayson's voice cut through the static, devoid of the usual construction site banter. "Stop the connection. Don't bolt it up." I frowned, the wind whipping a stray lock of hair that had escaped my hard hat across my eyes. "Say again, Wilson. I've got the piece in the hole. If I don't bolt it, it's swinging in the wind." "I said stop," he snapped. "Pack your belt, come down, you're done." For a second, I thought it was a joke. A bad one. "I'm in the middle of a critical pick, Grayson. I'm not playing games." "Neither am I," he replied, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "I've got a new crew coming in tomorrow. Younger guys, faster guys, men who can actually handle the pace. I don't need a diversity hire slowing down my schedule. Leave the bolts. Get to the skip." My blood went cold, colder than the November wind biting at my cheeks. "Diversity hire? I've been walking iron since you were in diapers, Grayson. I'm the lead connector." "Not anymore. You're a liability. Women don't walk iron on my timeline. Now get down here before I have security escort you." The radio clicked off. I stood there, 400 feet above the city traffic, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear of the height, but from a rage so pure it nearly blinded me. He was firing me mid-connection. It was the ultimate disrespect. It was dangerous. It was stupid. I looked at the bolt holes. They were perfectly aligned. If I walked away now, that beam would be unsecured, held only by the crane's choker. If the wind picked up, it could swing and take someone's head off. "Cass," Mikey's voice came through, shaky. "What's going on?" Boss says to cable down. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs. I looked at the bolt bucket hanging from my belt. "Hold it steady, Mikey," I whispered. I didn't leave it. I couldn't. It went against every instinct I had as a professional. I quickly jammed 2 bolts in, hand-tightening them just enough so the steel wouldn't kill anyone, then I unhooked my lanyard. "I'm coming down," I said, my voice flat. "But tell Wilson to have my check ready." I walked back along the narrow beam to the decking, my boots heavy, my mind racing. Grayson Wilson had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He just didn't know it yet. The ride down the personnel hoist, the skip, is usually filled with noise. Laughter, complaints about the cold, arguments about sports. But today, as the metal cage rattled down the side of the skeletal building, it was dead silent. There were 3 other guys in the hoist with me, 2 apprentices and an electrician. They all stared at their boots. They had heard the radio chatter. On a job site, everyone hears everything. The disrespect Grayson had just broadcasted was hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. When the cage hit the ground floor with a jarring clank, the gate slid open. The mud of the job site entrance was churned up and freezing. Standing there, just outside the trailer, was Grayson Wilson. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had bought his boots yesterday. They were pristine, unscuffed leather that cost more than my first car. He was wearing a white hard hat that shone like a beacon, and he was holding a clipboard like a shield. I stepped out of the hoist, my tool belt clanking around my waist. It weighed 30 pounds, loaded with wrenches, beaters, and drift pins. I didn't take it off. I wanted him to see the tools of the trade he clearly didn't understand. "I want my time card signed," I said, stopping 3 feet from him. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. My voice was low and dangerous. Grayson chuckled, looking around at the other workers who had paused to watch. "Easy there, Tiger. You'll get your check in the mail like everyone else." "You fired me for cause," I said, stepping closer, "for slowing down the schedule. I want that in writing, right now." He sneered, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "Look, Cass, let's be real, you're 48, you're a grandmother. This is a young man's game. I'm doing you a favor before you break a hip up there. You were too slow. You were holding up the raising gang." "I was waiting on the crane," I said, staring him dead in the eye. "And I was checking the heat numbers on the steel. You know, the seismic specs." Grayson's eyes flickered. For a split second, he looked nervous. Then the arrogance washed back over him. "Nobody cares about the numbers, Jones. We care about getting the floor poured. You were obsessing over paperwork while I'm trying to build a skyline. Give me your badge." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my site ID, and dropped it into the mud at his feet. "You're making a mistake, Wilson," I said. "A big one." "The only mistake was hiring a woman to do a connector's job," he spat. "Get off my site." I turned around. I could feel the eyes of 50 men on my back. Some looked angry, some looked pitying. I didn't want their pity. I walked toward the gate, my head high, the heavy belt swaying with my hips. As I reached the turnstile, I saw Pop Miller standing by the security shack. Pop was 70 if he was a day, retired but still hanging around the edges of the industry, delivering blueprints. He had taught me how to walk the iron 20 years ago. "Cass," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "Tell me I didn't just hear what I thought I heard." "He cut me loose, Pop," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Pop looked over my shoulder at Grayson, who was now laughing on his phone. "That boy ain't got the sense God gave a goose. Who's gonna sign the torque sheets?" I stopped. I looked at Pop. Then I looked back at the half-finished skeleton of the building rising into the gray sky. "Exactly," I whispered. I walked to my truck, threw my gear in the back, and sat in the driver's seat. My hands were shaking now, not from the cold, from the adrenaline. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Grayson thought he had just trimmed some fat. He didn't realize he had just cut the heart out of his own project. My house was too quiet. For the last 6 months, my life had been the rhythmic bang-bang-bang of impact guns, the screech of metal on metal, and the constant roar of the city below. Now, at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, the silence in my kitchen was deafening. I sat at the small wooden table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of me. I was still wearing my work clothes, flannel shirt, Carhartt pants reinforced at the knees. I hadn't even taken off my boots yet. It felt like if I took them off, I was admitting it was over. My daughter, Elena, walked in. She was 24, sharp as a tack, and worked as a data analyst. She took one look at me, home 3 hours early, staring at a wall, and dropped her bag. "Mom," she asked, her voice dropping, "did someone get hurt?" That's the ironworker family fear. Early arrival usually means an accident. "No," I said, rubbing my face with calloused hands. "Nobody got hurt, yet." "Then why are you home?" "Grayson Wilson fired me." Elena's jaw dropped. "The owner's nephew, the one you said couldn't read a blueprint if it was written in crayon." "The very same. He told me women don't walk iron, said I was too slow, said I was a liability." Elena sat down opposite me, her eyes narrowing. She pulled out her phone immediately. "That's illegal, Mom. That's wrongful termination. We can sue him into the ground." "We could," I said, finally taking a sip of the cold coffee. "But lawsuits take years. Grayson has lawyers on retainer who cost more than this house. By the time we saw a dime, that building would be finished and he'd be off ruining some other project. I looked out the window. From my backyard, if you looked through the trees, you could just see the cranes of the downtown skyline. I could see my crane. It was still moving. They were still working. He put a scab crew on, I muttered. Non-union, probably, or just inexperienced kids who won't ask questions. What kind of questions? Elena asked, sensing the shift in my tone. I turned to her. The kind I was asking, about the steel. I stood up and paced the small kitchen. Elena, this building, it's the Millennium Tower. It's an $80 million frame. It's in a seismic zone. The specs require high-tensile seismic-grade steel for the core columns. That stuff is expensive. It has to be tracked. Every single beam has a heat number stamped on it. I have to verify that number against the manifest before I bolt it in. And for the last 2 weeks, the numbers haven't been matching the manifest perfectly, I said. They were close, but not perfect. I was flagging them. I was making them send the beams back to the yard. That's why I was slow. I was doing my job. I stopped pacing. The realization hit me like a sleever bar to the gut. He didn't fire me because I'm a woman, Elena. He used that as an excuse because he knows it hurts. He fired me because I was the only one checking the numbers. Elena put her phone down. Mom, are you saying he's using bad steel? I'm saying he's using cheap steel, I replied, my voice hardening. Uncertified steel. And now that I'm gone, there is nobody up there with the high-tensile connector certification to sign off on the daily logs. Legally, they can't connect a single beam above the 40th floor without that signature. I looked at the clock. 2:30 p.m. They're working right now, I said, which means someone is forging my signature, or they are just building without it. I grabbed my phone. I scrolled past the union rep's number. I scrolled past the lawyer's number. I stopped on a name I hadn't called in 10 years. Owen Anderson, Department of Buildings. Who are you calling? Elena asked. The only man in the city who can stop a crane with a piece of paper, I said. I hit dial. I'm going to burn Grayson's timeline to the ground. The phone rang 3 times. 4, I almost hung up. 10 years is a lifetime in this business. Guys retire, get hurt, or move to management. But then, a voice answered, surprisingly clear and calm for a man who used to scream over the sound of impact wrenches. Department of Buildings, Audit Division. Anderson speaking. I took a breath. Owen, it's Cass Jones. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint rustle of papers, maybe a keyboard clacking in the background. Then, a sharp inhale. Cass Jones, the connector. The one who pulled me out from under that rigger's nightmare on the west side. That's the one, I said, a small, grim smile touching my lips. Though these days, I'm apparently just a liability, according to Grayson Wilson. Wilson? Owen's tone shifted instantly. It went from polite curiosity to something sharper. You're on the Millennium Tower job, the $80 million frame downtown. I corrected. Past tense. As of 2 hours ago, I was fired, escorted off the site, told my pace wasn't cutting it for his schedule. That doesn't sound right, Owen said slowly. You're the best connector in the city. I've seen you work. You don't slow down unless something is wrong. Exactly, I said. Something is wrong, Owen, the steel. The heat numbers on the columns for the 38th and 39th floors weren't matching the manifests perfectly. They were close, off by a digit or 2, but I was flagging them, sending them back to the yard. That's why I was slow. The silence on the other end was heavy. And now you're gone, Owen murmured, connecting the dots faster than I could weld them. And who's checking the steel now? Nobody with a high-tensile certification, I said. Which means they're either flying blind or someone is forging my sign-off on the daily logs. Legally, they can't connect above the 40th floor without a certified connector stamp. And I'm the only one on that crew who has it. Jesus, Owen breathed, if he's swapping seismic steel for standard grade in a high-wind zone. That building is a ticking time bomb. I need you to look into it, Owen, not as a favor, as an auditor. If he's cutting corners on the steel, he's cutting corners everywhere. Consider it done, Owen said, his voice hard. But I can't just storm in there on a hunch. I need proof. If I issue a stop work order without cause, the developer, Holloway, will have my badge. He's got friends in high places. I can get you proof, I said, my mind racing. But I need to get back on that site. Impossible, Owen countered. Wilson will have your picture at the gate. You're blacklisted. Not the site, I corrected myself, thinking fast. The paperwork, the daily logs, they're digital now, uploaded to the cloud server every night at 6:00 p.m. If I can prove the logs for today were signed after I was fired, or signed by someone else. That's fraud, Owen finished. Federal fraud if it involves interstate materials. Meet me, I said. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., the diner on 4th and Main. I'll bring what I have. I'll be there, Owen said. And Cass, I owe you a life. Let's make sure Wilson pays for this. The diner smelled of bacon grease and old coffee, a smell that had comforted me for 30 years. I sat in a booth at the back, facing the door. My hands were wrapped around a mug, but I wasn't drinking. I was watching. At 6:58 a.m., Owen Anderson walked in. He looked different than I remembered. The rugged, sunburned rigger was gone, replaced by a man in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks. He carried a briefcase instead of a tool belt, but his eyes were the same, watchful, intelligent. He slid into the booth opposite me. Cass, you look good, considering. I look like I'm unemployed, I grunted, sliding a folder across the table. Here's everything I printed out before I left the trailer yesterday. Copies of the last 2 weeks of heat number discrepancies. Owen opened the folder, scanning the pages. His eyebrows shot up. These aren't just typos, Cass. These are consistent. Look at the prefixes. A992 is the standard for structural steel. But the manifest says A913 grade 65, that's the high-strength seismic stuff. If the beam's stamped, A992 are going into the core. Then the building can't handle the sway, I finished. It's rigid where it needs to be flexible, and weak where it needs to be strong. And the price difference? Owen asked, tapping the paper. Massive, I said. Grade 65 is custom rolled. It takes months to get. Standard A992 is off the shelf. If Wilson is swapping them, he's pocketing the difference. We're talking millions, Owen, millions in materials alone. Owen closed the folder. This is enough for an audit, but to shut him down, to really nail him, I need the smoking gun. I need to catch him in the act of installing the bad steel knowing it's bad. How do we do that? Owen leaned in, lowering his voice. The DOB has a drone program now for facade inspections, but we can use it for active sites if there's a safety concern. I can fly a drone up to the 41st floor today. If we can get a high-res photo of a beam being installed with the wrong heat number, while the manifest says it's the right one. Then we have him, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. But there's a catch, Owen warned. Wilson isn't stupid. He knows the inspectors watch the cranes. He'll probably try to cover the stamps with fireproofing spray as soon as the beams are up. He can't spray them until the bolts are torqued and inspected, I said. That's the rule. The inspector has to see the connection before it gets covered. Right, Owen said. But who's the inspector on record for the site? I hesitated. It's supposed to be a third-party agency. Citywide inspections. Owen cursed under his breath. Citywide, they're notorious for drive-by inspections. They sign off from the ground. Exactly, I said. That's how he's getting away with it. He fires the only person who actually climbs the steel, me, and relies on a lazy inspector on the ground. Owen pulled out his phone. I'm going to schedule a random audit for this afternoon, but I need you to tell me exactly where to look, which column line is critical. I closed my eyes, visualizing the blueprints I had memorized. Column line G5, northwest corner, that's the wind bracing column. If that one fails, the whole corner goes. G5, Owen repeated. Done, I'll have a drone on it by 2:00 p.m. I watched him stand up, buttoning his jacket. He looked like a bureaucrat, but I saw the ironworker underneath. He was ready to fight. "Cass," he said, pausing, "be careful. Guys like Wilson, when they get cornered, they get dangerous." "I've walked on 4-inch beams in a blizzard, Owen," I said. "I know dangerous." I spent the rest of the morning at Alina's apartment. She had set up a command center on her dining table, 2 laptops and a tablet. "Okay, Mom," Alina said, typing furiously. "I hacked into the project management portal. Don't look at me like that. I guessed his password. It was Building 123. "You're kidding," I said, leaning over her shoulder. "I wish I was. Okay, here's the daily log for yesterday, the day you were fired." She turned the screen toward me. My breath hitched. There, at the bottom of the digital document, was a signature, Cassidy Jones. "That son of A," I whispered. "He forged it." "And look at the timestamp," Alina pointed. 5:45 p.m., you were already home by then. "He signed off on 24 connections," I said, reading the log. 24 beams installed after I left, and look at the heat numbers listed next to them. They're all perfect. Every single one matches the manifest. "So he's cooking the books," Alina said. "He's creating a paper trail that says the building is perfect," I said, "but the steel tells a different story." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Owen. "Drone is up. Feed is live. I'm sending you the link." I tapped the link Alina had forwarded to her laptop. A grainy video feed popped up. It was shaky at first, then stabilized. The view was breathtaking, a bird's-eye view of the city, focusing in on the steel skeleton of the Millennium Tower. "There it is," I pointed. "Column line G5. The drone zoomed in. A massive steel column was being lowered by the crane. 2 men were waiting for it, scabs I didn't recognize. They were struggling, wrestling the beam into place. They weren't using the right drift pins. It was sloppy. "Zoom in on the end of the beam," I told Alina. "The stamp should be right there, near the splice." Alina tapped the screen, pinching to zoom. The image pixelated, then cleared. There, stamped into the gray steel, were the numbers. A992, 45,882. I pulled out my copy of the manifest. I ran my finger down to column G5. Required, A913 grade 65 heat #77,291. "Gotcha," I whispered. The drone hovered. The men on the steel bolted it up. They didn't check the number. They didn't care. They just wanted to go home. Then one of them did something that made my blood boil. He pulled a can of spray paint from his belt, bright orange primer, and sprayed over the heat number, covering it up. "He's hiding it," Alina gasped. "He knows," I said. "Wilson knows exactly what he's doing. He's burying the evidence inside the building." I grabbed my phone and called Owen. "Did you see that?" I asked. "I saw it," Owen said, his voice grim. "He just painted over a non-compliant heat number. That's intentional concealment. That's criminal negligence." "What now?" "Now," Owen said, "I make a phone call to Mr. Halloway. And then I shut this whole damn circus down." "Wait," I said. "Don't call Halloway yet. If you call him now, Wilson might have time to spin it. He'll say it was a mistake. He'll blame the supplier." "So what do you suggest?" "Let them finish the floor," I said coldly. "Let them pour the concrete deck tomorrow. Once that concrete is set, that steel is locked in forever. If we catch him after the pour, he can't swap it out. He has to tear the whole floor down." "That's brutal," Owen said. "It'll cost Halloway millions." "It'll cost Wilson his career," I said. "And it'll prove I was right. Let him pour the concrete, Owen. Let him bury his own grave." There was a long pause. "Okay," Owen said. "We wait for the pour. But the second that concrete truck leaves, I'm red tagging the site." I hung up. I looked at the screen, where the men were now walking away from the compromised beam. Grayson Wilson thought he was building a skyscraper. He didn't realize he was building a prison cell. Wednesday morning dawned with the kind of biting cold that turns breath into smoke and steel into ice. I wasn't on the job site, but I felt every shiver. I was parked 2 blocks away in my truck, watching through binoculars as the concrete pump trucks lined up like elephants at a watering hole. The pour was scheduled for 7:00 a.m. They were casting the deck for the 39th floor, locking in the compromised steel forever. My phone sat on the dashboard, connected to Owen. "They're starting the pump," I murmured. "First truck is hooking up." "I see it," Owen's voice came through the speaker. "My inspector is parked around the corner. We're letting them pour the whole slab. Once it's wet and leveled, we move in." It was a gamble, a massive, expensive gamble. If we stopped them now, they could maybe argue it was a mix-up, swap the beams, and lose a week. But once that concrete cured around the steel columns, the only fix was demolition. Jackhammers, torches, millions of dollars in rework. I watched the boom of the pump truck extend, a long, gray arm reaching up to the sky. The hose began to pulse as the heavy aggregate slurry was pushed up 40 stories. Up on the deck, I could see the tiny figures of the laborers spreading the concrete, their boots deep in the gray muck. They were burying the evidence. Literally. "Wilson is on site," I said, spotting his pristine white hard hat near the construction hoist. He was pacing, phone to his ear, probably bragging about being ahead of schedule. "Good," Owen said. "Let him feel comfortable." 2 hours passed, the truck cycled through, the floor was poured, the finishers were smoothing it out, it was done, the steel was entombed. "Okay," Owen said. "It's 10:00 a.m., the pour is finished. My team is moving in." I watched as 3 Department of Buildings vehicles pulled up to the gate, lights flashing. Not police lights, amber strobe lights. But in construction, those lights are terrifying. They mean the city is here. The gate guard tried to stop them. I saw Owen step out of the lead car, flash his badge, and keep walking. His team followed, 2 inspectors with clipboards and a surveyor with a laser level. They marched straight to the hoist. I saw Wilson intercept them. Even from 2 blocks away, I could see his body language shift from arrogance to panic. He was waving his arms. Owen was calm, unmoving. He handed Wilson a piece of paper. The red tag. "Stop work order," I whispered, a fierce satisfaction burning in my chest. "Gotcha." My phone buzzed. It was Alina. "Mom, the project dashboard just went dark. They locked everyone out. What's happening?" "The DOB just shut them down," I said, "and I'm about to go watch the fireworks." I put the truck in gear and drove toward the gate. I wasn't an employee anymore, but I was a citizen on a public sidewalk. And I wanted a front row seat. The sight was chaos. The concrete trucks were being turned away. The crane had stopped moving. The silence that fell over the project was eerie. I parked and walked to the chain-link fence. A crowd of workers had gathered near the trailer. The scab crew Wilson had brought in to replace the union guys. They looked confused, angry. They weren't getting paid if the job was shut down. Wilson was shouting at Owen near the hoist. "You can't do this. We just poured. You're ruining the cure." Wilson screamed, his face red. "The cure is the least of your problems," Owen said, his voice carrying over the quiet site. "We have reason to believe the structural steel on floors 38 through 40 is non-compliant with seismic code. We're ordering a core sample and non-destructive testing on every column." "That's insane." Wilson yelled, "I have the manifests. They're all signed off." "By who?" Owen asked, holding up a tablet. "By Cassidy Jones, the woman you fired 2 days ago." Wilson froze. He looked around, suddenly realizing the trap. She signed them before she left," he stammered. "Really?" Owen swiped on the tablet. "Because the digital timestamp on these logs is 5:45 p.m. yesterday. Unless Ms. Jones has a ghost that signs documents, someone committed fraud." The color drained from Wilson's face. Just then, a black town car pulled up to the curb. A driver got out and opened the back door. Mr. Holloway stepped out. The developer. He was a small man, impeccably dressed in a cashmere coat, but his presence was heavy. He walked through the mud like it didn't exist. "Mr. Anderson," Holloway said, his voice smooth but cold. "Why is my crane stopped?" "Mr. Holloway," Owen nodded respectfully. "We've issued a stop work order due to critical safety violations regarding the structural steel. Specifically, the use of non-seismic grade beams in the moment frame." Holloway turned slowly to Wilson. "Is this true, Grayson?" No, Wilson practically shrieked. It's a lie. It's that disgruntled employee Jones. She's trying to sabotage us. Sabotage, I said, stepping up to the fence. They all turned. Holloway looked at me, then at Wilson. Ms. Jones, Holloway said, the connector. The certified connector, I corrected. The one who refused to install the wrong steel. The one who was fired for being slow, because I was checking the heat numbers your nephew was trying to hide. Holloway looked at Wilson. Grayson, show me the mill certificates for the steel on the trucks right now. Wilson swallowed hard. Uncle, I mean, sir, the paperwork is in the trailer. Bring it, Holloway commanded. Wilson ran to the trailer. Holloway walked over to the fence where I stood. You're the one who called this in, he asked quietly. I called the DOB to save your building from falling down in a windstorm, I said. You're welcome. Holloway stared at me for a long moment. He was a businessman, ruthless but not stupid. He knew when he was being played, and he was starting to realize it wasn't by me. If you're wrong, Holloway said, I will sue you for every penny you will ever earn. And if I'm right, I countered. If you're right, Holloway said, his eyes darkening, then Grayson is going to wish he had never been born. The testing took 2 days. They brought in a specialized team with ultrasonic testing equipment and X-ray scanners. They didn't have to chip much concrete, they just exposed the flanges of the beams. I spent those 2 days at home, pacing. Alina kept me updated on the rumors swirling in the industry. Everyone is talking about it, Mom, she said, scrolling through a construction forum. They're calling it the Holloway halt. People are saying Wilson was buying cheap Chinese steel and charging Holloway for domestic seismic. He was, I said, and pocketing the spread. It's an old trick, but usually you do it on non-structural stuff. Handrails, stairs, not the skeleton of the building. On Friday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Owen. The results are in, he said simply. I held my breath. And every single column on the 39th floor failed, Owen said. They're A992 standard. Not grade 65. They can't take the sheer load. The building is structurally compromised. So what happens? The stop work order is permanent until remediation, Owen said, which means they have to tear it down, I whispered. They have to demo the entire 39th floor, Owen confirmed. Concrete, rebar, decking, and steel. It's a total loss. Estimated cost is $4 million plus the delay penalties. And Wilson. Holloway just fired him, Owen said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Publicly, in front of the whole site. He's also being investigated by the DA for fraud and forgery. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. But there's more, Owen said. Holloway wants a meeting with you. With me. He wants to know how to fix it, Owen said. And he realizes the only person who actually knows what's going on is the woman he ignored. Tell him I'm busy, I said initially. Then I paused. No, tell him I'll meet him, but on my terms. What are your terms? He comes to my house, I said, and he brings a check for my wrongful termination and an apology. I'll relay the message, Owen chuckled. You've got him over a barrel, Cass. No, I said, looking out at the skyline where the crane stood still. I've just got the wrench. He's the nut that needs tightening. The following Monday, the news broke. It wasn't just industry gossip anymore, it was a headline. Millennium Tower HALTED, safety concerns cited. Holloway wasn't stupid. He knew he had to get ahead of the story before the investors panicked. My phone rang at 9:00 a.m. It wasn't Owen this time. It was a local number I didn't recognize. Ms. Jones, this is Marcus Thorne, Mr. Holloway's personal attorney. I put the phone on speaker so Alina could listen. She was already typing the name into her laptop. Top tier, she mouthed. Shark. Mr. Thorne, I said, keeping my voice level. To what do I owe the pleasure? Mr. Holloway would like to invite you to an emergency board meeting this afternoon at the Holloway Development offices. 2:00 p.m. I'm not on the board, I said, and I'm not an employee. We are aware, Thorne said, his tone clipped. However, your insights regarding the discrepancies on the 39th floor are crucial. Mr. Holloway believes your testimony could clarify the situation for the other stakeholders. Clarify? I laughed, a short, sharp sound. You mean he wants me to explain how his nephew nearly dropped a building on the city? We would appreciate your discretion, Thorne said smoothly, and your cooperation. There will be compensation for your time. I'm not interested in hush money, I said. I want my reputation back. And I want everyone to know exactly why I was fired. We can discuss that, Thorne said. 2:00 p.m., please be prompt. He hung up. I looked at Alina. They're scared. They're terrified, she corrected. If the investors pull out, the project dies. They need you to say it was just one bad batch of steel, not systemic fraud. But it was systemic, I said. Wilson was doing it for weeks. Then go in there and tell them, Alina said, her eyes shining. Burn it down, Mom. I put on my best blazer, the one I wore to weddings and funerals. I polished my boots until they shone. I wasn't going in there as a laborer. I was going in as the expert. The Holloway offices were all glass and chrome, a stark contrast to the mud and noise of the job site. I was escorted into a boardroom that overlooked the city. 12 men in suits sat around a massive mahogany table. Holloway was at the head. Grayson Wilson was there, too, but he wasn't sitting. He was standing in the corner, looking like a whipped dog. His arrogance had evaporated. Ms. Jones, Holloway said, standing up. Thank you for coming. I didn't sit. I stood at the end of the table, facing him. Let's cut to the chase, Holloway said. We know about the steel. We know about the heat numbers. What we need to know is, how bad is it? I looked around the room. These men controlled billions of dollars in real estate, but right now, they were looking at me like I held the keys to the kingdom. It's bad, I said clearly. Every column from floor 38 up is suspect. The moment frames, the skeleton that keeps the building standing in an earthquake, are made of standard steel. If a quake hits, or even a high wind event, the welds will hold, but the steel will shear. The building won't sway. It will snap. A murmur went around the table. And how do we fix it? One of the investors asked, a heavy-set man with a cigar. You tear it down, I said. You demo back to the 37th floor. You order the correct grade 65 steel. You wait the 12 weeks for fabrication, and you start over. That will cost millions. Wilson burst out from the corner. We can just retrofit. We can weld plates. Quiet. Holloway slammed his hand on the table. He turned back to me. Is he right? Can we retrofit? You can try, I said. But no engineer will sign off on it, and no connector with a brain will bolt it up, because it's not just about the steel, it's about the trust. You can't build a safe building on a foundation of lies. Holloway stared at me. He knew I was right. What do you want, Ms. Jones? He asked finally. I want my termination record expunged, I said. I want full back pay for the time I was off, and I want a public statement that I was fired for refusing to compromise safety standards. Holloway nodded slowly. Done, is that all? No, I said, pointing at Wilson. I want him gone, permanently, not just from this job, from the industry. If he ever steps foot on a steel deck again, I walk. The room went silent. Wilson looked at his uncle, pleadingly. Holloway didn't even look at him. Agreed. By Wednesday, the demolition crews were already on site, but they weren't building up, they were tearing down. The sound of jackhammers echoed through the neighborhood, the sound of failure. Wilson was escorted out of the building by security. I heard later that Holloway had not only fired him, but was suing him for the cost of the rework and the fraud. The DA had picked up the case, too. Wilson was looking at serious jail time for falsifying safety documents and endangering the public. I was back on site on Thursday. Holloway had asked me to personally oversee the remediation. He gave me a title, Director of Quality Assurance. It came with a raise, a new truck, and most importantly, the authority to shut down anything I didn't like. The first thing I did was walk the 37th floor. The concrete deck was scarred where the columns had been cut. The rebar was exposed like severed nerves. It was ugly, but it was honest. Pop Miller was there, delivering blueprints. He saw me in my white hard hat, not a manager's hat, but a foreman's. "Well, look at you," he grinned, his gold tooth flashing. "Director Jones has a nice ring to it." "Don't start, Pop," I said, smiling. "It's just a title, I'm still checking bolts." "You're doing more than that," Pop said, gesturing to the skyline. "You saved this job, and you saved a lot of lives." He handed me a rolled-up set of drawings. "New steel arrives Monday, grade 65, stamped and certified." "Good," I said, "and Pop, tell the boys I want 100% torque inspection on every bolt. No exceptions." "You got it, boss." Later that afternoon, I sat in the trailer, my trailer now. Elena was helping me set up the new digital tracking system. "You know," she said, looking up from her laptop. "Wilson tried to call me." "He did?" "Yeah, asking if I could help him delete some emails from the server." I laughed. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd be happy to," she grinned, "right after I forwarded them to the district attorney." "That's my girl," I said. The phone rang. It was Owen. "Just thought you should know," he said. "The DOB is doing a citywide audit of all projects Wilson managed in the last 5 years. We found 3 other buildings with suspect steel." "So it wasn't just this one," I said, feeling a chill. "No, he's been doing it for years, skimming off the top. We're shutting them all down for testing. You exposed a massive fraud ring, Cass." "I just wanted to do my job, Owen," I said. "I just wanted the building to stand up." "Well," Owen said, "because of you it will." The Millennium Tower was finally topped out. The last beam, painted white and signed by every worker on the crew, was hoisted into place as the sun set over the city. I stood on the roof, 50 stories up. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair around my face, but I felt grounded. Holloway was there, shaking hands. The investors were there, drinking champagne. But the real celebration was among the crew. The guys who had sweated and bled to fix Wilson's mess. Pop Miller came over, holding 2 plastic cups of warm soda. "To the Iron Lady," he toasted, clinking his cup against mine. "To the job," I corrected, "and doing it right." We watched the city lights flicker on below us. It was beautiful, and terrifying, and perfect. "You know," Pop said, looking at the horizon, "they say steel has a memory. It remembers the heat, the stress, the load." "Maybe," I said, "but it also remembers who put it there." I looked down at the street miles below. I thought about Wilson, currently awaiting trial. I thought about the younger me, fighting for every inch of respect in a world that didn't want me. And I thought about the future. The life twist wasn't that I got my job back. It was that I realized I didn't need the job to define me. I defined the job. I took a sip of the soda. It was flat, but it tasted like victory,